Good morning, students. I hope you all are doing good and you all are safe by God's grace. Okay, so yesterday I had taught you the lesson, The Portrait of a Lady by Kushwant Singh. It was a very interesting story, right? Isn't it? Yes, it was very interesting. And I had taught you the entire story, and now I'm going to read all the passage, the entire passage, and I'm going to explain you sentence by sentence. Okay? So, I want you to take your English book and turn to page number 1. Okay? So, have you taken? Okay, turn to page number 1. Okay? So, in page number 1, you've got a picture, right? Oh, yes. And there are two pictures actually. And picture of a nuclear family and a joint family. Okay. So they have given an exercise below that. So what you have to do is you have to find the differences between a nuclear family and a joint family. Okay. The differences. What are the differences you can find in a nuclear family as well as in a joint family? Okay. So I want you to write it by your own, okay? So your own ideas, you can write it here, okay? So I'll give you some example for a nuclear family and a joint family, okay? So in a nuclear family, there will be much of a privacy, right? Because only there will be 2 to 3 people or maximum of 4 people, right? And not more than that. So in a nuclear family, you will be having privacy. You will have separate rooms for yourself and you can do whatever you want in your own privacy, in your own place, right? But unlike a nuclear family, you cannot find much of a privacy in a joint family because there will be people around 8 to 12, maybe even exceeding 12. So there will not be separate room for each other and there will not be much of a privacy. Everybody has to live together, okay? And here you have to share your things in a joint family, okay? But unlike a nuclear family, here the advantage is privacy, but here there is fun and sharing of love, right? Because you'll be having your grandmother here, your grandfather here, there will be small children. You will be getting love from your parents, from your aunt and from your grandparents as well. So you have that advantage in the joint family. And nuclear family, there is privacy. And so there are a lot of other differences between these two kinds of family. So I want you to write them down, okay, once the class gets over, okay? So let us go on with the lesson. So the heading is that here is a story that brings out the bond between the author and his loving grandmother. Okay, the author is a small child here and he continues to grow in this lesson. And he has a grandmother and he has shown love for his grandmother. And the grandmother has loved his grandchild to a greater extent. So we are going to see the love between the author and his grandmother. Okay. So my grandmother, like everybody's grandmother, was an old woman. She had been old and wrinkled for the 20 years that I had known her. People said that she had once been young and pretty and had even had a husband, but that was hard to believe. Okay, so what the author says, like every grandmother, my grandmother was also old. Grandmother, they are very old, right? Maybe starting from 60 and it goes on until 90, up to 95, right? And the author's grandmother was also old woman, okay? And she had been old and wrinkled for the past 20 years. For the past 20 years, she had a wrinkled face. What do you mean by wrinkles? Wrinkles na kanna suringi irukkiradhu, right? Slight folds. You called us suringi irukkiradhu nama fold nu solluvom. So slight folds in the face and in the skin. Generally in the skin is called as wrinkles. So the author's grandmother had wrinkles all over her face and running through everywhere. Okay. So people said that she had been pretty. What do you mean by pretty? She was very attractive. before 20 years ago, okay? When she was young, she was very beautiful and she was very attractive and pretty. But it was hard to believe for the author because since from the birth he had seen her, she had been very old and she had a wrinkled face. So she did not, it was hard to believe for him that she was once pretty and beautiful. Okay. And what about his grandfather? My grandfather's portrait hung above the mantelpiece in the drawing room. He wore a big turban and a loose fitting clothes. His long and white beard covered the best part of his chest, and he looked at least 100 years old. Okay, so the author tells about his grandfather. His grandfather was no more because he had passed away long back ago, and they had a portrait of him. Okay, what do you mean by portrait? Portrait. So, portrait is nothing. That is a picture hung on a wall. Yesterday I told you, right? So, that is a picture hung on a wall, and you, in a portrait, you will find mostly from the face until the shoulders and not more than that. Okay. So, that is called as a portrait. So, the portrait of his grandfather hung on the wall. அதாவது தாத்தாவோட ஃபோட்டோவை செவரில் என்ன பண்ணியிருந்தாங்க, தொங்க விட்டுருந்தாங்க. And his grandfather had a long, he had a big turban in his head. ஒரு பெரிய தலப்பாக வச்சிருந்தாரு. And then he had loose fitting clothes, நல்ல லூஸான clothes போட்டிருந்தாரு. And especially he had a long beard. Okay, long beard, a white color beard that covered up to his chest. அதாவது நெஞ்சு வரைக்கும் அவருக்கு ஒரு பெரிய வெள்ளை கலரில் ஒரு தாடி இருந்துச்சு. Okay, and he did not look the sort of a person who would have a wife or children. He looked as if he could only have lots and lots of grandchildren. Okay, he did not look like he had children, but he looked as if he had only grandchildren. What does it mean actually? Since he was very old, since he seemed that he was about 100 years old, it was not possible for us to believe that he has children. It seemed like he only had grandchildren. அவருக்கு பேர பிள்ளைகள் மட்டும்தான் இருக்குன்ற மாதிரி தான் நமக்கு பார்க்க தோணும். பார்த்தா அவருக்கு பிள்ளைகள் இருக்கிற மாதிரி நமக்கு தெரியாது. Because he was very, very old in that portrait. Okay. Okay. As for my grandmother being young and pretty, the thought was almost revolting. The thought was almost revolting. What does it mean? It means that it was hard to believe. Everybody said that the author's grandmother was young and pretty during her initial days, but it was very, very hard to believe. That is what the author says. The thought was almost revolting. Revolting means unacceptable. Unacceptable. That was hard to believe. Okay. She often told us of the games she used to play as a child. That seemed quite absurd and undignified on her part, and we treated it like the fables of the prophets she used to tell us. Okay. So what does she do? See, you have seen the old people, right? The elder people, what they used to say. They used to tell the games they had played in their days, right? So especially the women, the girls, long back ago, they used to play some games that were absurd. What do you mean by absurd? Absurd means illogical. And ஒரு குடம் தண்ணி எடுத்து ஒரு பூத்தாச்சி, அதுக்கப்புறம் நிறைய அந்த தத்தைக்க புத்தைக்க என்னெல்லாமோ விளையாடுறாங்கல்ல, அதுக்கப்புறம் கொலையா மந்திரிக்கா, இந்த மாதிரி கேம்ஸ் they used to play, right? They used to play games like that. There was no logic in that games, right? They played only for fun. Now what games do you play? You don't play those games, right? You play Ludo and you play online games. Otherwise you play like cricket and football and hockey. But in these games you have certain rules, right? So how you have proper cricketing shots, and you have some rules, you have rules and regulations, you have so many rules, right? So but these games they played only for pure fun, and there was no logic. So that is what the author tries to convey, that it seemed quite absurd. The games my grandmother told me that she played during her days, it seemed quite absurd for me. Absurd means it was not logical. There was no logic in those games. Okay. And it was like the fables of the prophets she used to tell us. Fables means stories. அது ஏதோ கதை விடுற மாதிரி தான் இருந்துச்சு எங்க பாட்டி எனக்கு சொல்றது. So that is what the author is saying. Okay. She had always been short and fat and slightly bent. Her face was a crisscross of wrinkles running from everywhere to everywhere. Okay. She was short. அவங்க குள்ளமா இருந்தாங்க. She was fat and she was slightly bent. I had yesterday told you, right? So as the age passes by, as you get older and older, your spinal cord gets weakened and automatically you are slightly bent. Okay. So likewise, the author's grandmother was also slightly bent. And there was crisscross of wrinkles. There were wrinkles, many wrinkles that were running from everywhere to everywhere. She had wrinkles all around her body. Okay. And no, we were certain she had always been as we had known her. Old, so terribly old that she could not have grown older and had stayed at the same age for 20 years. She could never have been pretty, but she was always beautiful. So, she was very very old. அதாவது எந்த அளவுக்கு வயசா இருந்தாங்க அப்படின்னா இனிமே இன்னும் வயசாகிறதுக்கு வாய்ப்பே இல்லை, அந்த அளவுக்கு வயசா இருந்தாங்க. She was very very old that she will not be able to get older anymore. Okay. She was very old. It was impossible for her to get older than this. Okay. And she was not pretty. She was not attractive because she had wrinkles all over her body. But she always seemed too beautiful to be beautiful. Okay. அவங்க வந்துட்டு எப்படி சொல்றது, அந்த ஒரு அழகான மேனி வேணா இல்லாம இருந்திருக்கலாம், பட் வந்துட்டு அவங்க பார்க்கறதுக்கு எப்படி இருந்தாங்க, அழகா இருந்தாங்க. ஓகே. So she hobbled about the house in spotless white with one hand resting on her waist to balance her stoop and the other telling the beads of her rosary. Her silver locks were scattered untidily over her pale, puckered face, and her lips constantly moved in inaudible prayer. Okay. And yesterday I told you, no, the grandmother used to hobble along the courtyard. So what do you mean by hobble? Hobbled means walked unsteadily. They are weak, right? The elder people, the older people, old-aged people, they are very weak, right? So they are not able to walk as steadily as we are. Okay, we used to walk steadily, right? Because we are very young and we have strength and we walk steadily. But they are not able to walk steadily. So what do? They hobble. Adha talladi nadakkuradhu. So she used to hobble across the house, and she used to keep one of her hands in her waist, okay, to balance her stoop. What do you mean by stoop? Stoop means அப்படி குனிஞ்சு குனிஞ்சு எந்திரிக்கிறது. She was slightly bent, right? உங்களுக்கு லைட்டா கூண் விழுந்திருந்ததுனால, so it used to pain, the back used to pain for her, so she used to bend her forward and then backward. So that is called as stoop. Okay, what do you mean by stoop? Stoop means moving one's head or body forwards and downwards. அப்படியே குனிஞ்சு குனிஞ்சு எந்திரிக்கிறது தான் என்ன சொல்லுவோம், stoop. Okay. So in order to balance her stoop, she kept one of her hands at the hip. Okay, at her hip. And then her silver locks were scattered untidily over her pale and puckered face. Okay, what do you mean by silver locks? In the இடத்துல, so it is like a metaphor. The author tries to say that the white curly hairs of the grandmother is mentioned as silver locks. Okay, silver locks na enadhu, and பழைய காலத்து பாட்டிக்கெல்லாம் பார்த்துருக்கீங்களா, முடி வந்துட்டு ஒயிட் கலரில் சுருண்டு இருக்கும். It seemed like a silver lock for the author. Okay, she was beautiful. She was like the winter landscape in the mountains, an expanse of pure white serenity, breathing peace and contentment. Okay, she was very beautiful. During the winter, the mountain looks very beautiful, right? அந்த குளிர் காலத்துல அந்த மலைகளை பார்க்கும்போது எப்படி இருக்கும், அது பச்சை பசேல்னு, அது பார்க்கறதுக்கு பசுமையா, it looks beautiful, right? It looks soulful, right? And the author's grandmother also looked like an expanse of white serenity and breathing contentment. Okay, she wore a white dress, right? White saree, right? So she looked, அதாவது வெள்ளை கலர்ல செழிப்பா அவங்கள பார்க்கறதுக்கு she was looking very soulful and beautiful, okay, like a winter landscape, the mountains in the winter landscape, okay. So she was beautiful, and my grandmother and I were good friends. My parents left me with her when they went to live in the city, and we were constantly together, okay. So what does the parents of the author do? The parents left the author with his grandmother, and they had gone to the nearby city for work, okay. So they had gone to the city nearby for working, and there was nobody to take care of the author, so the author's parents left him with his grandmother, okay. So the grandmother took care of the author, okay. So what does she do? She used to wake me up in the morning and get me ready for school. She said her morning prayer in a monotonous sing-song while she bathed and dressed me in the hope that I would listen and get to know it by heart. I listened because I loved her voice but never bothered to learn it, okay. So what does she do? She used to wake the author early in the morning, and what does she do? She will make him take bath, okay. அவனை குளிப்பாட்டுறாங்க. While making him take bath, she used to sing monotonous prayers, okay. Monotonous, what do you mean by monotonous? Monotonous means unchanging and boring, okay. இந்த பாமாலைகள்னு சொல்லுவாங்கல்ல சர்ச்சில். ஸோ these younger generation do not love those பாமாலைஸ். அந்த பாமாலையெல்லாம் உங்களுக்கு பிடிக்காது. Because it will be boring and unchanging, and it will be slow and steady. So those songs the grandmother used to sing while making the author take bath. அவனை குளிப்பாட்டிட்டு இருக்கும்போது அந்த பாடல்கள்லாம் படிப்பாங்க. எதுக்கு? Hoping that his grandchild will also learn to sing that song by heart. The author listened to the song, but why did he listen to the song? He listened because her song was beautiful to hear, and that is why he heard it, but he never bothered to learn it by heart, okay. She sang in a beautiful voice, and it was very beautiful and attractive to hear that song, and that is why he heard the song, and he never bothered to learn it, okay. So then she would fetch my wooden slate, which she had already washed and plastered with yellow chalk, a tiny earthen ink pot, and a red pen, tie them all in a bundle and hand it to me. So what will the grandmother do? So she will take the wooden slate that she had already washed, and she will plaster it with the yellow color chalk piece. Or yellow color chalk piece and the wooden slate மேல ஒட்டி வச்சிட்டு அதுக்கப்புறம் என்ன பண்ணுவாங்க? She handed him an earthen ink pot and a red color pen, okay. Now you have refill pen, and you have gel pens, etc., etc. You have many varieties of pens, right? But in olden days there was only ink pen was available, okay. So even when I was younger, we used to use those ink pens, okay. And so what does the author do? The author will have ink pens, and the grandmother took an ink pot and a red color pen and a wooden slate and some chalk pieces, tied them all in a cloth, and the grandmother gave it to the author, okay. Okay, right. Okay, so after a breakfast of a thick stale chapati with a little with a little butter and sugar spread on it, we went to school. She carried several stale chapatis with her for the village dogs, okay. So what do they have for breakfast? Hope you all had your breakfast, right? So what did you have? You would have had idli, dosas, puri, anything, right? So what does this author have? This author used to have stale chapati. Stale means konjam palaya chapati, konjam stronger, harder irukum, seriya. So these stale chapatis with butter and sugar spread on it. Vennayum seeniyum tadavi, he used to have the chapatis for his breakfast, okay. After having breakfast, what the grandmother used to do? She used to take the remaining stale chapatis, she will break it into small pieces, and she will take it along with her for the village dogs. There were several dogs in the village, And she used to feed all those dogs with the stale chapatis. Okay. So இப்போ நம்ம என்ன பண்ணுவோம், நாயை கண்டா என்ன பண்ணுவோம், நாயை கண்டா கல்லை காணலை, கல்லை கண்ட நாயை காணலன்னு சொல்லிட்டு என்ன பண்ணுறது, கள்ளத்துக்கு அடிக்கிறது நாயை. ஆனால் இந்த பாட்டி என்ன பண்ணாங்க, she fed all those village dogs. Okay, she gave food, provided food to all those village dogs. She was a very kind-hearted woman. Okay. And okay, after having breakfast, she took some chapatis for the dogs. And then what do? My grandmother always went to school with me because the school was attached to the temple. Okay, the priest taught us the alphabet and the morning prayer. Okay, so the grandmother and the author, so they went to the school. Okay, after leaving him in the school, the grandmother would go to the temple because the temple was nearby the school, and she would start reading the scriptures and he will start learning in the school. Okay, so what the author learns in the school, the author will learn the alphabets and the morning prayer, right? We also had learned alphabets when we were young, right? During our LKG or UKG, you learned your alphabets and morning prayers, right? So the author was also very young, and he will learn the alphabets, and he will also learn the morning prayer. Okay, so during that time, while the children sat in rows on either side of the veranda singing the alphabet or the prayer in a chorus, my grandmother sat inside reading the scriptures. Okay, the children of the school, they used to sit in the veranda and they used to sing, right? A, B, C, D. Like we learned the alphabet songs, right? And like that, the author used to sing the alphabet songs and also the morning prayers. They used to sing the morning prayer. You used to sing the morning prayers, right, during the assembly in your school. And likewise, the author and his fellow students used to sing alphabets and morning prayers in the veranda. And in the meantime, during that time, what does the grandmother do? The grandmother will go to the temple nearby and she will start reading the scriptures. What do you mean by scripture? Scripture means sacred writing. Okay, sacred writing. For Christian, what is this? Christians, the scripture is the Bible, right? And for Muslims, Quran is the scripture. And for the Hindus, it is Bhagavad Gita, right? So every religion has its own scripture, and the grandmother used to go to the temple and she will start reading the scripture. Okay, so when we had both finished, we would walk back together. Okay, this time the village dogs would meet us at the temple door. They followed us to a home, growling and fighting with each other for the chapati we threw to them. Okay, so now as soon as the school gets over, the grandmother will come from the temple and she will take the author with him to the house. Okay, while they went to the house, several village dogs will follow them. Okay, and what I had told you earlier, the grandmother had taken some chapatis, stale chapatis, for the dogs, right, to feed the dogs. And what they will do, they followed us to our home and growling and fighting with each other for the chapati we threw to them. So what does the grandmother do? The grandmother will break the chapatis and throw it to the dogs, and the dogs would be barking and growling at each other for the chapatis that they threw to them. Okay, இவங்க எரிஞ்ச சப்பாத்திகளுக்காக அதை சண்டை போட்டுக்கிட்டு குலைச்சிக்கிட்டு என்ன பண்ணுவோம், அந்த நாய்கள் எல்லாமே இந்த பாட்டியும் பேரனையும் என்ன பண்ணுது, ஃபாலோ பண்ணி வீடு வரைக்கும் வரும். ஓகே, ஸோ லைஃப் வாஸ் கோயிங் வெரி ஸ்மூத்லி ஃபார் தி ஆத்தர் and his grandmother. Life was going very, very smoothly because they used to get up in the morning, they used to get ready, the author used to go to the school, and in the meantime, the grandmother used to go to the temple. So life was going, and while coming back, they used to feed the village dogs also. Okay, so they were very happy. The grandmother and the author were very, very happy. But suddenly, there was a change in their life. Okay, there was a Okay, when my parents were comfortably settled in the city, they sent for us. That was a turning point in our friendship. Although we shared the same room, my grandmother no longer came to school with me. I used to go to an English school in a motor bus. There were no dogs in the streets, and she took to feeding sparrows in the courtyard of our city house. Now, the life of the author and his grandmother had changed drastically. Okay, so what happened? They had shifted to the city because the author's parents were well settled in the city and they had sent for them and they had gone to the city to live with the author's parents. Okay, so now the grandmother doesn't go with the author to the school because the school bus will come and take the author to the school. And the grandmother was sitting alone in the house. Okay. So, and so now she does not go with them to the school. So she cannot feed the dogs in the cities, right? So what does she do? She had love for the creatures, right? So creatures, what do you mean by creature? மனிதர்கள் மட்டும் இல்ல விலங்குகள். So she had love for creatures as well. So what, now she was unable to feed the dogs, but what did she do? She went upstairs. Okay, she went upstairs in their city house and she fed the sparrows using the breadcrumbs. Okay, breadcrumbs என்ன பண்றாங்க, மேல உள்ள குருவிகளுக்கு என்ன பண்றாங்க, கொடுக்கறாங்க. Okay, and as the years rolled by, we saw less of each other. For some time, she continued to wake me up and get me ready for school. When I came back, she would ask me what the teacher had taught me. Okay, as the year rolled by, now earlier they used to talk and they used to go along with each other, right? But now, as the years rolled by, they did not see each other well. Okay, and for some time. Earlier, when they went to the city, the grandmother used to wake the author up and make him ready for school. And when he came back from the school, she used to ask the author what you learnt in the school. The author, what does the author used to say? I would tell her English words and little things of Western science and learning, the law of gravity, Archimedes' principle, the world being round, etc. This made her unhappy. She could not help me with my lessons. She did not believe in the things they taught at the English school and was distressed that there was no teaching about God and the scriptures. Okay, now the grandmother used to ask the author what he had learnt in the schools, and he used to say, they taught me that the world was round, there is law of gravity, and there is Archimedes' principle, and there is Newton's law. You too would have learnt, right? What is Newton's principle? Newton's third principle, for every action and for every action there is an equal and opposite reaction, right? And what is Newton's second law? A body stays in rest until an external force is applied on it, right? Or a body continues in motion until it is disturbed by another force, right? You have learnt many Newton's law and you have learnt Archimedes' principle, right? So what does the Archimedes' principle state? It states that when a body or an object falls into water, it displaces the same amount of water as the volume of the object fell, right? So he have learnt many principles. So he used to tell his grandmother that I have learnt many principles, the world being round and etc. And this made her unhappy because she was unable to help him with the lessons because she was an old lady, she was not much educated, and she knew the alphabets and the scriptures, but she did not know these laws. So she was unhappy because she was unable to help the author with these lessons. Okay, and she used to ask him whether they teach about scriptures and God. அவங்க கடவுளை பற்றி சொல்லி கொடுக்குறாங்களா, ஸ்கிரிப்சர்ஸை பற்றி சொல்லி கொடுக்குறாங்களா? The author replied, no, they don't teach about God and the scriptures. And this made her distressed. Okay, this made the grandmother distressed. What do you mean by distressed? Distressed na துன்பம். Okay, distress na என்னது? துன்பம். அதை வந்துட்டு கிராண்ட் மதரை வந்துட்டு ரொம்ப துன்பத்துக்குள்ள ஆளாக்குச்சு. எதனால? அவங்க கடவுளை பற்றி சொல்லிக் கொடுக்கலையே ஸ்கூலில், நம்மளோட ஹோலி ஸ்கிரிப்சர்ஸை பற்றி அவங்க சொல்லிக் கொடுக்கலையேன்னு என்ன பண்ணாங்க, ரொம்ப வருத்தப்பட்டாங்க. ஓகே, ஸோ ஒன் டே he goes to his grandmother and tells her that she joined a music lesson, a music class, and she did not tell anything. And years time rolled by, they did not speak much. Okay, so what happens, when I went up to the university, I was given a room of my own. The common link of friendship was snapped. Okay, so now the author had completed his school education and now he goes to the university. Okay, he goes to the university and the common friendship was broken, was snapped. What does mean by snapped? Snapped means broken. Okay, the common friendship between the author and his grandmother was broken. Okay, was broken. Okay, so my grandmother accepted her seclusion with resignation. What do you mean by seclusion? Seclusion means isolation. See, the author used to go to the university. While coming from the college, he will go to his separate room and will start studying. He will have his dinner and he will go to sleep. What does the author's parent do? They will go to the work, they will come back, they will make food for the author, and after that they too will have the food and they will sleep. There was nobody to talk with the grandmother, and the grandmother was secluded. So she accepted her seclusion, okay, with resignation. What do you mean by seclusion? Seclusion means isolation. தனித்து விடப்பட்டார்கள். அந்த பாட்டி என்ன பண்ணியாச்சு, தனிச்சு விட்டாச்சு. Yesterday I told you, right, even in our house there will be grandparents and we don't spend our time with our grandparents, right? So we shouldn't do that. So that was what happening with the author's grandmother. Okay, she rarely left her spinning wheel to talk to anyone. From sunrise to sunset, she sat by her wheel spinning and reciting prayers. So she did just two things. What did she do? She didn't talk to anyone. She had a spinning wheel. Okay, what do you mean by spinning wheel? Gandhiji used to have that spinning wheel, right? So with that spinning wheel, she used to work with that. She spinned the clothes using that spinning wheel from sunrise to sunset. சூரிய உதயத்திலிருந்து சூரியன் மறையிற வரைக்கும் பாட்டி கூட யாருமே பேசாதனால பாட்டி என்ன பண்ணுறாங்க, அந்த ஸ்பின் வீலை வச்சு அந்த என்ன பண்ணுங்க, துணி நெய்தல்னு சொல்லுவாங்கள்ல, துணியை மட்டும் நெய்துட்டு இருந்தாங்க. அண்ட் while she was spinning the clothes, she was also reciting the prayers. அப்படியே ஜெபமும் வாயிலே என்ன பண்ணிட்டு இருந்தாங்க, சொல்லிக்கிட்டு இருந்தாங்க. ஓகே, so only in the afternoon she relaxed for a while to feed the sparrows. While she sat in the veranda breaking the bread into little bits, hundreds of little birds collected round her, creating a veritable bedlam of chirping. Okay, that shows the love of the grandmother to the creatures. So only in the afternoon the grandmother relaxed. What did she do? She went to this terrace. Okay, she broke the bread into crumbs, little crumbs. She spread it on the floor, and all the sparrows nearby came to feed at the breadcrumbs. Okay, and there was constant chirping. What do you mean by chirping? Yesterday I told you, chirping means அது கீச்சுன்னு சத்தம் போடுறது. எல்லா குருவிகளும் என்ன பண்ணுவோம், மத்தியான நேரத்தில் வந்து பாட்டி போட்டுற பிரெட் கிரம்ஸை சந்தோஷமாக வந்து சாப்பிட்டுட்டு போகும். ஸோ that was the happiest hour for her. Okay, she smiled. Okay, while she sat in the veranda breaking the bread into little bits, hundreds of little birds collected round her, creating a veritable bedlam of chirping. What do you mean by bedlam of chirping? Noisy confusion. கீச் சத்தம் போட்டுக்கிட்டே இருந்துச்சு அந்த குருவிகள். நான் சந்தோஷமா பாட்டி கொடுக்குற பிரெட் கிரம்ஸை என்ன பண்ணுச்சு, சாப்பிட்டுச்சு. Okay, and some came and perched on her legs, others on her shoulders, and some even sat on her head. The sparrows came and perched on the grandmother's head. What do you mean by perched? Perched means sat or rested. உட்கார்றது. அந்த குருவிகள்லாம் வந்து என்ன பண்ணும், அப்படியே பாட்டியோட தலை மேலே உட்காந்துருக்கும், சிலது ஷோல்டர் மேலே உட்காந்துருக்கும், சிலது கால் மேலே உட்காந்துருக்கும். ஸோ ஷீ நெவர் ஷூட் இட் அவே, விரட்டி விடவே இல்லை. சந்தோஷமாக அந்த குருவிகளுக்கு உணவளித்தாங்க பாட்டி. ஓகே, ஸோ ஆஃப்டர் that was the happiest half hour. அந்த அரை மணி நேரம் தான் பாட்டியோட அந்த வாழ்க்கையில் சந்தோஷமான நேரமாக இருந்துச்சு. சந்தோஷமாக அவங்க செலவழிச்ச நேரம் அதுதான். ஓகே, when I decided to go abroad for further studies, I was sure my grandmother would be upset. I'd be away for 5 years and at her age, one could never tell. Okay, now the author had completed his studies in the university in our country. Okay, so நம்ம கண்ட்ரியில் ஆத்தர் வந்துட்டு என்ன பண்ணிட்டாரு, காலேஜ் படிப்பை முடிச்சிட்டாரு. இன்னும் மேல் படிப்புக்காக for further studies he has to go to abroad. He has to go abroad, out of station, out of India. வெளிநாட்டுக்கு போகணும். So he will not be coming back from abroad for almost 5 years. 5 வருஷத்துக்கு திரும்பி வரவே மாட்டாரு. So his grandmother was very old, right? So one could never tell within that 5 years many things can happen. She can even pass away because she's very old, right? So he was very sad, and he went and told his grandmother that he was going to leave abroad. Okay, but she was not even sentimental. She came to leave me at the railway station but did not talk or show any emotion. Her lips moved in prayer, her mind was lost in prayer. Okay, so now the author has to go abroad, right? So he has gone to the station, he has gone to the railway station. Okay, so he will go in the train, and then he will go to the airport, and then he will go abroad. Okay, so grandmother also came with him to the station to send him off. Okay, and what do the most of the parents do? See, I was working in Chennai for some time, and whenever I used to go to Chennai, my mother used to get sentimental. No? Her eyes would become moist. அப்படியே கண்ணில் தண்ணி வந்துடும். ஐயோ பையன் போகிறானே அப்படின்னு சொல்லிட்டு. Most of the mothers are sentimental, and most of the grandmothers are also sentimental, right? And they show their emotions suddenly. But the author's grandmother was not of that type. Okay, she was a different type. She did not show any emotion. Okay, and she did not talk also. What she did, her lips moved in prayer, her mind was lost in prayer. At that time also she was telling the prayers using her rosary. Okay, and silently she kissed my forehead, and when I left I cherished the most moist imprint as perhaps the last sign of physical contact between us. So what did she do? She was praying using that rosary, and she silently kissed the forehead of the author. So authoroட நெத்தியில என்ன பண்றாங்க, ஒரு அழகான முத்தத்தை கொடுக்குறாங்க. Okay, and it was a moist imprint. அது ஈரமா இருந்துச்சு, சரியா? So she thought, what the author thought, maybe this was the last physical contact between me and my grandmother. ஒருவேளை எனக்கும் எங்க பாட்டிக்கு உள்ள கடைசி physical contact இந்த கிஸ்ஸா தான் இருக்கும், இந்த மாய்ஸ்ட் இம்ப்ரிண்ட்டாக தான் இருக்கும், ஈரமான இந்த முத்தமாக தான் இருக்கும்னு என்ன பண்ணாரு அந்த ஆத்தர் நினைச்சாரு. பட் ஆஃப்டர் 5 years what happened? But that was not so. After 5 years I came back home and was met by her at the station. 5 வருஷம் கழிச்சு the author returns back from abroad, and he was very happy to find his grandmother still alive. She did not pass away, she was still alive. Okay, she was very happy. She did not look a day older. She still had no time for words, and while she clasped me in her arms, I could hear her reciting her prayers. 5 வருஷம் கழிச்சு வராரு, இப்பவும் ஒரு மாற்றமே இல்லை பாட்டிட்ட. இப்போ என்ன பண்றாங்க பாட்டி? She clasped the author's hand in her arms. After clasped, what do you mean by clasped? Clasped means not to hold tighter. Clasped. What does it mean? Hold tighter. So the grandmother clasped the author's hand tightly in her arms. Okay, right. And she did not change a bit. She was the same grandmother as she used to be. So now also she did not talk. She was telling the prayers. Her mind was filled with prayer. Okay. And even on the first day of my arrival, her happiest moments were with the sparrows, whom she fed longer and with frivolous rebukes. Okay. So what happens? So when you are away from home for a longer period of time, after that you return back to your home, they will show more love, right? So I used to come from Chennai. I told you, I worked in Chennai. So when I returned back from Chennai to my home, people used to show lots of love on the first day. First day, I will have chicken, I will have mutton, I'll have juice, and I will have all the snacks I asked for the first few days. For the first few days, they show lots of love. And as the time passes by, the love also starts reducing. That is the human nature, right? Because when you see people after a very long time, you show too much emotion and too much love. And after that, the love it starts decreasing. The love remains the same, but the passion and the emotion that we show towards them starts decreasing. But in the initial day, there is lots of love and lots of emotion. But even on the first day, the grandmother of the author did not show any love or any emotion. She had love, but she did not show any emotion. That is what the author is trying to say. Okay, even on the first day of my arrival, her happiest moment were with their sparrows. மொத நாள் வந்திருக்காரு, ஆனாலும் ஆத்தர் கூட செலவழிக்கல அந்த நேரத்தை. Her happy moments was with the sparrows. Okay, she fed the sparrows. Okay, with frivolous rebukes. What do you mean by rebukes? Rebukes means scoldings. So the இப்போ நாய்களெல்லாம் நம்ம வீட்டில் வளர்ப்போம். நம்ம என்ன பண்ணுவோம், அந்த நாய்களை திட்டுவோம். It will not understand, but we scold it out of love, right? So for example, இப்போ சாப்பாடு வைக்க போறோம்னா கொஞ்சம் மெதுவாக சாப்பிட, எதுக்கு இவ்வளோ அவசரம் பறக்கிற அப்படின்னு சொல்லுவோம்ல, நாய் வந்துட்டு மேலே கை கால தூக்கி போடும்போது. ஸோ நம்ம திட்டுறோம்ல. ஸோ அதே மாதிரி this grandmother used to feed the sparrows with frivolous rebukes, in the மாதிரி scolding. Though the sparrows did not understand, she scolded them out of love. Okay, so that is called rebukes, scoldings. Okay, in the evening a change came over her. She did not pray. So I told you, all along, all day long she used to pray, right? She used to spin the wheel and she used to pray. But one day there was a major difference. She did not pray. She stopped praying. What she did? She collected the women of the neighborhood. பக்கத்தில் இருக்க பொம்பளைங்களெல்லாம் என்ன பண்ணாரு, கூப்பிட்டாங்க. அந்த பெண்களெல்லாம் என்ன பண்ணுறாங்க, கூப்பிட்டுட்டு she got a drum. Okay, for several hours she thumped the sagging skins of the dilapidated drum and sang of the homecoming of warriors. Dilapidated, what do you mean by dilapidated? Dilapidated means damaged. Okay, so damaged. Dilapidated means damaged. So she got a drum which was already damaged and she thumped means strike heavily. Okay, அப்படி பயங்கரமாக ட்ரம் வாசிச்சு பக்கத்தில் உள்ள பெண்களெல்லாம் கூப்பிட்டு she was singing. Okay, she was singing and singing. That day she was not praying. She sang Homecoming of the Warriors. There is a song called Homecoming of the Warriors that the Sikhs used to sing. Okay, Sikhs அந்த சிங்குன்னு சொல்லுவோம்ல, அந்த Sikhs வந்து என்ன பண்ணுவாங்க, Homecoming of the Warriorsன்ற ஒரு பாடலை பாடுவாங்க. So she was singing that song and the author and his parents tried to stop her because she was singing in a loud voice. She was unable to sing. Even though she was unable to sing, she was overstraining herself to sing that song. Okay, she was overstraining too much. And the author and the author's parents persuaded her not to overstrain, but she did not listen. She did not pay heed to her, and she was constantly singing. Okay, so next day what happened? Okay, but the next morning, she was taken ill. It was a mild fever, and the doctor told us that it would go. But my grandmother thought differently. She told us that her end was near. She said that since only a few years before the close of the last chapter of her life, she had omitted to pray. She was not going to waste any more time talking to us. Okay, so now, since she had overstrained herself for singing the last night, ஷி ஃபெல் இல். அவங்களுக்கு உடம்பு சரியில்லாமல் வந்துருச்சு. ரொம்ப ஓவர் ஸ்ட்ரெயின் பண்ணி பாடினதுனால அடுத்த நாள் என்ன ஆயிடுச்சு, காய்ச்சல் வந்துருச்சு. ஸோ தி ஆத்தர் அண்ட் திஸ் பேரண்ட்ஸ் டுக் தி grandmother to a nearby hospital and they met a doctor, and the doctor said it is only normal fever and no problem, she will get cured within 1 or 2 days. But you know what the grandmother said? Grandmother said, no, I'm not going to live long, my end is near. That is what the grandmother told. And she also told, I don't want to waste my last time talking with you, but I want to recite the prayers. நான் கடைசி நேரத்தில் என்னோட கொஞ்ச நேரம் தான் இருக்குது எனக்கு, நான் சாக போகிறேன் எனக்கே தெரியுது. அந்த நேரத்தை நான் உங்கள்கிட்ட பேசி நான் வந்துட்டு என்னோட டைம் வேஸ்ட் பண்ண விரும்பலை. ஐ ஆம் கோயிங் டு ரிசைட் த ப்ரேயர்ஸ். ஸோ தட் இஸ் வாட் தி கிராண்ட்மதர் டெல்ஸ். ஓகே, வி ப்ரொட்டஸ்டட் பட் ஷீ இக்னோர்ட் அவர் ப்ரொட்டஸ்ட். நாங்கள் சண்டை போட்டோம், நீங்கள் அப்படி பண்ணக்கூடாது, நீங்கள் எங்ககிட்ட பேசுங்க அப்படின்னு சொன்னோம். பட் ஷீ ப்ரொட்டஸ்டட், ஷீ டிட் நாட், ஷீ இக்னோர்ட் த ப்ரொட்டஸ்ட். அதை அவங்க கண்டுக்கவே இல்லை. ஷீ ஸ்டார்டட் ப்ரேயிங். ஓகே, even before we could suspect, her lips stopped moving and the rosary fell from her lifeless fingers. A peaceful pallor spread on her face and we knew that she was dead. Okay, நாங்க எதிர்பார்க்கிறதுக்குள்ள, even before we suspect, her lips stopped moving and the rosary fell from her lifeless fingers. Okay, what happened? அவங்களோட வாய் அசைவு நின்று போயிடுச்சு. அவங்களோட அந்த ஜபமாலை ரோசாரி கையிலிருந்து தவறி கீழே விழுந்துருச்சு. பிகாஸ் லைஃப்லெஸ் ஹேண்ட்ஸ், லைஃப் இஸ் கான், ஷீ ஹேஸ் passed away at last. Okay, a peaceful pallor spread on her face. Okay, pallor means unhealthy pale appearance. Pale means without any color. Okay, so என்ன சொல்லிடுச்சு, அந்த பீஸ்ஃபுல் பேலர் அவங்க முகமே அப்படி என்ன ஆயிடுச்சு, அப்படி வாடி போயிடுச்சு. அப்படி மரணமடைந்த முகம் எப்படி வாடுன்னு உங்களுக்கு தெரியும்ல. ஸோ there was no life in it and it has become pallor. Okay, so we lifted her off the bed and as customary laid her on the ground and covered her with a red shroud. So what did the author and his parents do? They took the grandmother and they laid her on the floor. Okay, நடு வீட்டில் ஃப்ளோரில் என்ன பண்ணாங்க, கடத்திட்டாங்க, அந்த அவங்க பாட்டியை கடத்திட்டாங்க. and they wrapped, okay, they wrapped their grandmother using a shroud. Okay, what do you mean by shroud? அந்த இறந்து போன டெட் பாடியை நம்ம வந்துட்டு ஒரு துணியால் சுற்றுறோம்ல, அந்த துணியை தான் நம்ம என்ன சொல்லுவோம், wrapped. So they wrapped their grandmother using a red color shroud. Okay, in North India, here they used to wrap the dead bodies using white cloth, right? White cloth, இந்த வெள்ளை கலர் வேஷ்டி வச்சு தானே சுற்றுவாங்க. பட் in North India, they used to wrap the dead bodies with a red color shroud. Okay, so red color shroud. And after a few hours of mourning, we left her alone to make arrangements for her funeral. What is mean by funeral? Funeral na enadhu? Adakam da funeral. Seriya? So the author and his parents were crying and crying for the loss of their grandmother. And after some hours, they left her alone. Thaniya vittu enna pannitaanga, dead body thaniya vittu poitaanga, because they have to make arrangements for the funeral, right? இப்போ நம்ம ஊரில் அடக்கம் பண்ணால் என்னெல்லாம் பண்ணுவாங்க, வெளியில் பந்தல் போடுவாங்க, ரொம்ப வயசானவங்கன்னா மேளம்லாம் அடிப்பாங்க. அதுக்கப்புறம் we used to get some garland, right? பெரிய பூமாலெல்லாம் வாங்கிட்டு வருவோம். and we used to get some crude stretcher, right? அந்த அடக்கம் பண்ணுறதுக்கு பெட்டி எடுத்துகிட்டு வரணும், சவப்பெட்டி எடுத்துகிட்டு வரணும். and we have to make arrangements for her cremation, right? புதைக்கிறதுக்கு புதைக்குழி இதை ரெடி பண்ணணும். நிறைய வேலைகள் இருக்குது அப்படி தானே. ஸோ there are various activities involved in the funeral, right? Funeral and cremation. So the author and his parents left their grandmother's body alone and they went to take care of the activities of the funeral. Okay, so now the grandmother's body was lying dead in the middle of the room alone without anybody. Okay, and okay, after a few hours of mourning, we left her alone to make arrangements for the funeral. In the evening, we went to her room with a crude stretcher to take her to be cremated. The sun was setting and had lit her room and veranda with a blaze of golden light. We stopped halfway in the courtyard, all over the veranda and in her room, right up where she lay dead and stiff. Wrapped in the red shroud, thousands of sparrows sat scattered on the floor. So, what happens? To the astonishment and surprise of the author, அது சாயங்காலம் ஆயிடுச்சு. அப்படியே அவங்க மிடில் ஆஃப் த பாடியில் வந்துட்டு okay, now to the astonishment of the author, where his grandmother was lying, there was a golden blaze of light. அந்த சாயங்காலம் சூரியன் மறையக்கூடிய நேரத்தில் அந்த வெளிச்சம் வரும்ல, அந்த வெளிச்சம் அப்படி கோல்டன் கலர் லைட் வந்துட்டு அந்த ரூமையே ஸ்ப்ரெட் பண்ணியிருக்கு. அந்த ரூமையே ஸ்ப்ரெட் பண்ணி அவங்க பாட்டி அப்படி பளிச்சுன்னு தெரியுறாங்க அந்த பாடி. அதை சுற்றிலும் ஆயிரக்கணக்கில் அந்த ஸ்பேரோஸ் வந்து என்ன இருக்குது, கூடியிருக்குது. ஓகே, ஸோ every day in the afternoon the sparrows used to come to get feeded by the grandmother, right? The grandmother used to give breadcrumbs. So all the sparrows were sitting quietly surrounding the grandmother's body. Okay, every time they used to chirrup, right? There was constant chirruping, right? Kitch kitchen satham podutrukku. But today they did not make any sound. They were sitting quietly. No, the author and his there was no chirruping. We felt sorry for the bats, and my mother fetched some bread for them. She broke it into little crumbs, the way my grandmother used to do, and threw it to them. The sparrows took no notice of the bread. When we carried my grandmother's corpse off, they flew away quietly. Next morning, the sweepers swept the breadcrumbs into the dustbin. Okay, what happens? Now the author and his mother think that they are very hungry, like every day. And they broke the breadcrumbs and threw it to them, like their grandmother used to do. But the sparrows did not take any notice of them breadcrumbs. And they were staying quietly. After taking the grandmother's corpse, what do you mean by corpse? Corpse, not dead body, okay? After carrying the corpse of the grandmother, they all flew away quietly. And they flew away quietly, and next day, the sweeper of the house, the வீடு தூக்குறவங்க என்ன பண்ணிட்டாங்க? They swept the breadcrumbs into the dustbin. So the sparrows showed the love for their grandmother in return. Okay, the grandmother fed the sparrows, and the sparrows were the ones who came for the funeral of the beloved grandmother. Okay, so we must extend our loves to the creature also. We must love our grandparents, and we must show respect to them. We must spend our time, and I have briefly discussed this in the last class, and hope you had gone through that class also. So kindly learn all these meanings thoroughly, okay? So these meanings are given it in the 4th and 5th page of your book, and I've added 3 meanings to it, so I don't want you to learn that by heart, but you have to learn these meanings by heart, okay? So in the next video, I'll be solving all the exercises that is given in the 5th, 6th, 7th, and 8th page, okay? And also in the 10th, 11th, and 12th page. And let us also learn some of the grammars that is given in this lesson, okay? So, hope you understood this lesson, and hope you loved this story. So, what I want you to do is learn all these meanings by heart and kindly write it, each meanings thrice. Okay, I want you to write each meaning thrice so that it will be easy for you to get it by heart. Okay, so and I want you to learn these by heart and write each meaning 3 times, and that will be your homework. Okay, so you have to submit the homework once you come to meet the teachers in person next week. Okay, thank you so much. So I'll be meeting you in the next video. Thank you so much.